Welcome to the Colbycast, episode 223. Thank you for joining us. Today, Bonnie, Jordan, and I welcome artist and master penman Jake Weidmann to the Colbycast. In addition to discussing the beauty and benefits of physically writing, Jake gives us insight into the history of penmanship and shares many interesting stories with us. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to Jake's work and resources, and listen in to see if you're up to the challenge to take up the pen and write. We hope that you'll enjoy the show.
Hi there, I'm Bonnie, Colby homeschooling mom of 4 lads and lasses, liturgical musician, popcorn, and podcast fanatic.
And this is Stephen, homeschooling father of 5 and chief homeschooling officer for Colby Academy.
And I'm Jordan. As a product of homeschooling, I'm proud to teach Greek and Latin for Colby online and serve as the Alumni and Public Relations Director.
Stephen, how's your day going?
Going very well. We're in the midst of dropping children off at colleges. So it's been on one coast, and so preparing for the next coast in the upcoming week.
Okay, I won't ask you what time it is because I wouldn't expect you to know right out where you're going back and forth. Lots of it. Jordan, how about you? How are you?
It's going well. I'm kicking off the school year, so deep in a lot of readings and trying to help my own kids get through their work, teaching classes online. So it's been a good day, a good start to the year.
Good deal. Today we're getting to visit with Jake Weidmann, who is a master penman. He's going to talk to us about all sorts of artistry, penmanship, handwriting. Jake, welcome to the Colbycast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So Trey Bailey, who was on the Colbycast earlier this year, was a contributor to the Classical Education podcast for a while. And I noticed that you had been a guest on another episode of that podcast. I found it just very fascinating. Your conversation about penmanship and handwriting and its importance, its enduring importance. Then I found you on the CLT podcast, the Anchored podcast, visiting with Soren Schwab, who has also come to talk to us here on the Colbycast. And I was thinking, hopefully we'll get our turn too. And I'm so glad that it's working out today.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Would you tell us a bit about yourself and your background and maybe what a master penman is?
Yeah, sure. So I live and work in Littleton, Colorado. And I am a professional artist. So I work primarily doing just commission artwork and then doing limited edition prints of some of my stuff and sell online. I'm not represented by any gallery. I'm just we're just real entrepreneurial over here between just my wife and I. We're the only ones that really run the business. We have a lot of great people that help come around and support us and lend a helping hand when needs be, but otherwise we love doing business, love creating art and beauty, and we launched a jewelry line in 2018 that's really headed up by my wife, but we do that together as well. And then, as you said, yes, I'm a master penman, and that has become something that has really sort of separated me out from a lot of other artists. It's kind of become like my special sauce in a way that I tend to integrate calligraphy into all of the artwork that I do. If it's not directly, writing on the page, then it somehow shows its face and form in the flowing lines that you see in my work, whether that's in flourishing or acanthus scroll work that is seen both 2-dimensionally and 3-dimensionally. So yeah, being a master penman was something that was not something I ever foresaw. I actually went to school for psychology and never thought I'd make a living as an artist, but it was something that I discovered along the way. I had a deep love and passion for handwriting and discovered this small association that was keeping the art of handwriting alive. And it's called the International Association of Master Penmen, Engrossers, and Teachers of Handwriting, or IAMPETH for short. And thank God there's a short. But they're just a really passionate group that really sees handwriting not only in the full-fledged art form of creating these beautiful manuscripts and certificate work, but also see that beauty being more utilitarian in the way of regular handwriting, which is why teachers of handwriting is actually included within the association. And so I got my certificate as a master penman in 2011, and that was a really, unique thing. It was just something I wanted to do for myself, just something that I was passionate about, loved the tradition of what a master penman was. And so the final test in order to become a master penman is you have to execute your own certificate. So yeah, that's right. Kids, nothing in life is free. So even that, it was a great test, but and then from that point on, it was just my career as an artist sort of found me as much as I found it. And it just started taking off and growing. And it was like, while I tried to get different jobs in psychology, the thing that I was trained in, it was just door after door was shutting. Whereas with art and calligraphy, it was door after door was opening. And so I just walked through them.
One of the things that stood out when I started looking over your website and reading some things was just that, as it usually happens, I just didn't know all of the history and the work and the development that goes into things. So, just I know Jordan and I have talked about books in the past, where now it's just like order whatever you want on Amazon, it shows up the next day. But at one point, you had men in monasteries, painstakingly copying one text onto another. And, when he started talking about different people who had developed different scripts and different, again, I don't write that often, so I think you talk about hand cramps and things that we get when we're writing today, but even just different motions or styles and it's like, of course, if you're going to write all day, you're going to, just like you're fine crafting your tools, the whole method is going to have to take work and changing your system so that you can actually do that. But maybe you can share a little bit with us about some of that history, at least.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the history of handwriting goes back to pretty much the dawn of time. If you read like G.K. Chesterton's work, he says that if you look back at earliest man, the one thing that separates us is that we were artists. And it's like you go into the deepest, darkest caves and you find there on the cave walls, these drawings, these beautiful images that were made by man. Dig far enough down in the earth and there you will find that man has drawn a picture of a reindeer. But no matter how far down you dig, you will never find that a reindeer has drawn a picture of a man. For art is the signature of man. And so I think, it's like in those first drawings, they were capturing stories on the cave walls by hand. And so, of course, that essentially formed, further and further along, and you look at different civilizations had their own approach to it. But a lot of those pictographic forms started forming their way into written language. And so and it still exists in even the language that we use today, like the letter A, for instance. That is one that we can actually trace back that form. While the modern alphabet that we use has had many iterations, gone through many different cultures and civilizations and been refined over the years, there's still that pictographic influence. And so if you take the letter A, for instance, and you turn it upside down, it looks like a bull's head. And that was the alpha or the aleph. It was the first and strongest creature that was known back in the ancient civilizations, because an ox could, pull as much as 10 men. And so that's why it became like the first letter, the alpha. So like that's the beautiful thing of partaking in the written language, is this goes back, arguably it goes back to the very dawn of time, when it was like we were capturing our story down in some tangible way. Okay, so let's fast forward a little bit, and you find, as you mentioned, these scribes who dedicated their lives to writing, and particularly, they entered into this level of devotion with the word, as writers of old manuscripts. And in the scriptorium was usually that place dedicated to the written word, and it was a lifestyle that they dedicated themselves to, and worked on forming the individual letters, and creating this sort of muscle memory that you have this beautiful consistency of the page, and that you were copying, letter form, not only letter form by letter form, but stroke by stroke, these individual letters to form the words, to form the paragraphs, to fill the page, to fill the books. And you think like that, we owe such a debt of gratitude to those early people who spent their lives, and it was tedious work. And you can even read the journals of some of the earliest scribes, and they talk about, they say day after day, I am doing the same thing over and over. And how does one have this, essentially the stamina for such monotony? But they did so painstakingly, to preserve the word, because it is really important. So I think that like there's that next level of like this part of the human story that we are a part of, that is captured in handwriting from them. And then, we'll fast forward several hundred more years and to like the time of American heritage handwriting. And I'll speak now about one of my favorite heroes of the written form was Platt Rogers Spencer, who was he was really the first master penman. And he was the father of American heritage handwriting. And he had this like love from early on for handwriting. And so he wanted to develop his own form. Up to that point, we were using just English roundhand, which is what you see like the Declaration of Independence was written in. But Platt Rogers Spencer in the 1800s wanted to devise his own form of handwriting. And he had this beautiful theology and philosophy that undergirded his handwriting. And he believed that God, who is the originator of all beauty, had instilled that beauty in nature. So if he derived inspiration from nature for his handwriting, then he'd have the beauty of God in his own hand, which is deeply insightful for a 13-year-old. But not only that, Spencerian script was meant to be written at a 52-degree angle using primarily wrist movement. So rather than using finger movement, which is what we typically default to today, Platt Rogers Spencer was using muscular movement, movement from the wrist. And so you're using larger joints, larger tendons and muscles that don't fatigue as quickly. And so you could write in this form all day long without ever getting writer's cramp. And so this was a very important and innovative form. And it's one of the things, sadly, that we've forgotten, that we've gotten away from. It was something that was really instilled in handwriting curriculum up through like the 70s and even early 80s in the form of Palmer method. But we sort of skip over that part. We forget about what, in the act of writing, the human body is the primary instrument at work. And we don't think about actually utilizing that instrument well.
Yeah, I think that all of that is so fascinating because there's a whole history there that probably a lot of people don't think about anymore. I've had many conversations with Stephen where so I write and I go through phases where I start doing handwriting. My handwriting is terrible. I have no method. Even my 5-year-old daughter has better handwriting than I do. But it's something that I feel like I think more clearly or something when I take the scaffolding away or the crutches away where you want to right click and get another word that you think might fit better or something like that. When I take all that away, I feel like I think more clearly. And I wonder if you could talk to us a bit just about the connection really with the pen, the paper. I have a certain pen that I like. It's very simple, but it's the kind of pen and the kind of paper that I like to write on. So a very very basic form of maybe participating in this kind of thing, this creation. Mine is not pretty, and it always gets transcribed to a Word document eventually. That's the destination it's going to. But just that the act, I guess, is what I'm kind of getting at here.
Yeah, and if we actually back up and talk about the importance of how critical it is to the actual process of learning, I think that's where handwriting shows its greatest strength. This was something that, thank God something did come out of my psychology degree, because in cognitive psychology, we actually discussed the importance of handwriting and how important it is to the development of the brain, because there's been solid research done on the development of the brain and the different connections that are going on when you are writing by hand versus when you are typing on a keyboard, because there are different because your fingers and your hand and your arm are working with and actually forming the anatomical portions of the letter. It gives you a deeper familiarity with the letter form itself. And then now tying all of those letters together into a word cements them further into your brain, because you're activating a lot in order to articulate those different movements of your hand. Handwriting has been proven to be very critical when it comes to even identifying some of the early faults that children fall into in learning. Things like dysgraphia, where you're flipping the letter around. There's a lot of kids that sort of get confused and they can't remember which direction an R goes. But by handwriting, that helps, identify, their interpretation of writing, and helps the instructor know when and how to lean in. To help them to have a better grasp of those letters. It also with dyslexia, it really shows up a lot more with handwriting, and helps and in a lot of ways is going to help fight against the two of those together, especially when you up the ante and write in cursive, because cursive has this sort of didactic flow about it where one letter links into another, and that's going to help orient those letters more beautifully into the form of the word. But in so doing, as you're doing it on the page, it cements it further into your mind. And so as you're creating a greater connection with your hand and the pen, then that connection is cemented into your mind. And so it's a critical part of learning in those early stages. But I think it is actually, it's a lifelong discipline that is never going to return void. And I think that's really important, is with all of our technology, which is great, and it certainly has its place. But I think writing by hand is something that does, as you intuitively spoke to, it's I'm going to choose my words carefully, and I'm going to think about them more critically, because autocorrect is not working for me in this instance. And so it's actually activating those parts of the brain. And it's sort of, those different aspects of spelling and grammar. If you don't use it, you lose it, that sort of thing. If you're always relying on your technology to make up for you in that way, then it's you're going to find that left alone, you don't really have a solid grasp of spelling and grammar and word choice if you're just defaulting all the time to technology taking those things over. And not to mention the creative aspect. I always actually hate it when I'm writing an email and it wants to autocomplete my next sentence. I automatically choose a different way of saying that, because I'm stop putting words in my mouth. I will choose my own words. As one of the great things that we have as autonomous beings is expressing ourselves in our own words. And that's something I'm not about to abdicate to some automated system.
I think oftentimes I keep thinking we make everything utilitarian. So of course, when you're looking at writing, it's it's because we need to communicate this. And so as we, especially in the last couple of centuries or last century plus here, I guess, was we embrace all of this technology and we think, well, what do we want to do? We want to communicate quickly with somebody over here. So email would be better than a letter, but we lose things, I think, along the way in that utilitarian mode, like you're saying. It makes me think of when I was in college, my grandparents would send me handwritten letters, usually once a month. And my grandfather was a rebel when it came to spelling. He didn't like the conventions of the normal way people spell things. He would just do it like he thought they should be done. But also just
I might have to adopt that. That sounds pretty good. A rebel when it comes to spelling. I'm just going to choose my own way. Yeah, move aside, Webster. Yes.
it was always great because you'd look at it at first and then say, no, just say it out loud. Okay, that's what he's saying. It read like it should be, but it didn't look like the word I was used to.
Oh my gosh. That is amazing. I've never heard of that. I'm sure you would have been really good at the game Mad Gab, for instance. But no, and I think, that there is so much more that is, especially when it comes to interpersonal communication, like handwriting was the first form of social media. It was the first way of conveying ourselves, of communicating to other people, and just as you said, it's like we're always thinking about what is the most efficient, quickest way of communicating to people. And I think that's a little bit sad if it becomes completely utilitarian. I think maybe emailing your CPA back about your taxes, yeah, absolutely. Something fast, quick, easy, and clear is going to serve its purpose. But when it comes to an individual like a family member, for instance, there's so much more that is communicated through the handwritten word rather than what is typed. Penmanship is to writing what eloquence is to speaking. And so it's like developing your ability in penmanship is very much like developing your ability to speak and growing in eloquence when it comes to speaking. And so much more of what we communicate is actually done in tone. And so handwriting has the capability of carrying that tone. And it may not always be pretty. But it will distinctly be you. Something kind of hilarious, like growing up, my father has terrible handwriting, and it's something that, I try not to let the other master penmen know of my poor pedigree of penmanship when on my father's side. But, like we grew up and it was always like, we loved getting a note from our father. It didn't matter that his handwriting was a mess. And of course, there were always, we'd always joke about who could actually read my dad's handwriting best, who could interpret the chicken scratches on the page best. But it was still a note from my dad. And it meant the world. And even if it took a little bit more time to go through it, it carried some element of his character in that. And so I think that that's important, even if you're not a master penman, if you don't fancy yourself a good handwriter, that really doesn't matter to the people who are receiving it. Yes, it's always good to try. I'm going to say it's always good to try and improve and learn new things. And there's a myriad of benefits that come from that. But being bold enough, being intentional enough to put pen to paper when you're communicating to loved ones is something that will always be treasured, especially in this day and age, especially inundated with as much digital information as we are.
And Jacob, one of the videos I saw that was talking about the work that goes into getting to the level to be called a master penman when there's very few in the world. And you've mentioned a couple of your sort of heroes, John
DeCollibus. Yeah. John DeCollibus.
And Platt Rogers Spencer was one. I'm sure there's others out there. So I wonder, to get to the level of being like top notch worldwide, I mean, There's probably a lot of imitation, and you mentioned Spencer though with his innovation. And what role do those things, imitation and then innovation, innovating on the tradition you've inherited or mastered, how has that played out in your own work?
Oh, that's a really good question. Because there is, when you step into tradition, like I have in the form of calligraphy, there is a set style of doing things, and you're always pursuing this level of perfection of the ideal. And perfection is to craftsmen like the North Star is to the traveler. It is something to be ever pursued but never reached. It is that guiding light. And so you would think that in a lot of ways that sort of strips out a lot of the creativity, a lot of the individuality of the art form, but that isn't so. There is inevitably, no matter how much you pursue that ideal form, no matter how much you model your handwriting off after someone else's, inevitably it's going to carry some element of you. And that's just because of the way that you interpret things. It comes down even to the body mechanics and how you are composed from proportional and muscularity like aspect. It's going to imprint itself on the page. And so that already there's some level of creativity, but within the art form, the idea is like that you grow to a level of mastery that you can start innovating. You do start taking things and going off to the next level. And, some people misunderstand this. They think like, well, you learn the rules only to break them. And it's like, no. You learn the rules so well that you know how to expound on them and use them in context that most other people don't really see them at play. But there they still are. So, there's this idea that you want to master simplicity in order to perfect complexity. And so that's where the real innovation starts taking hold. Is, you have this unbelievable ability generations later to grow on the giants that have walked before you, but now take it to new heights. And that's where I feel like I am now going to take it from this point on. I'm going to start innovating and have innovated a lot in the true letter forms that I have, and start expressing them in my own way. Start integrating them into compositions that have never been done before, or integrating like for instance, like bird flourishing was a very like traditional form of using the calligraphic strokes to quickly compose these beautiful images of these whimsical, simple birds. But for me, in my own work, I'm actually taking my ability to paint and draw realistically and integrating those with the calligraphic strokes to bring a whole new expression to what bird flourishing actually is. And so it's like you see these like very realistic drawn like swallows or hummingbirds or swans that are drawn with like hyper realistic technique, but then integrated with these beautiful simple strokes of the calligraphic form. And that's one way that I'm innovating, sort of taking those traditions of old and expressing them in a new way.
See, this is also inspiring to hear you describe it this way and to see some of your work. So turning a bit to the study of handwriting for us at home in our homeschool settings, do you have any suggestions for working with younger students, getting them going on handwriting? Anything you would speak to there for folks who are in that place?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're homeschooling our two oldest right now, and one of the things is we've started them off earlier. I didn't start learning cursive till I was in third grade. Now the collaborative homeschool program that we have them in right now, they start learning in kindergarten, and so I think like learning earlier is actually really a better way to go, rather than having to like introduce it later on. And I think that this might be confirmed in a lot of the ways that like you look at younger kids, when it comes to language development. And if a child learns language, particularly before the ages of like 3, for instance, then they find that if you do like a brain scan of where the language area, which is near the temporal lobe, on the sides of our head, like the area that lights up when they're speaking their native language is the same. It's the same regardless of what language they're speaking on if they learn both at the same time. If you learn later in life, there's sort of a part next to the main language area of the brain that lights up, as well as that area. And so what is essentially happening is we're, translating in real time when you learn a second language later in life. Whereas like when you introduce it earlier, it becomes more innate. It becomes a natural part of their understanding. And so, I haven't seen as much study on this, but but there are a lot of different programs that introduce cursive writing earlier. And I think that this probably follows sort of in that same way that the brain is wired, that the sooner you introduce it, the easier it is for them to become fluent in it and for it to stick longer. And don't underestimate kids. It's like they have just this insane ability to catch on to some of these things. And, there's such a beauty and romance to cursive handwriting that has a natural draw all its own. My daughter, for instance, and I've worked with her like very little on her handwriting. I'm trying not to have too many cooks in the kitchen, and letting, my wife and her other, like her teacher as part of the collaborative program that she's in, kind of head up, the cursive handwriting stuff. But she's eating it up, and she has phenomenal cursive handwriting. I mean, stuff like when I look at it, I was like, this is better than where I was in like 3rd or 4th grade. And she's just now in 1st grade. And so that's one tip that I would say. And I think just inviting them into like, to the beauty of it, to the romance of it, that you are, in the end, you're creating art, you're allowing them to express their creativity. That it's, unfortunately, we tend to, kind of educate. I don't know if you're familiar with the late great Sir Ken Robinson, but he talks about how in Western culture we tend to educate people from the neck up and slightly to one side, but I think, with handwriting, there is the creativity aspect already baked into the cake. And so by bringing that in and letting them express themselves, I think has a natural draw all its own. So if you can introduce that earlier, I think that's a wonderful way to go.
A lot of our Colby teachers online and us here at home, if we're doing homeschool, our courses offline as homeschool courses, we make a big deal about note taking, the necessity of writing good notes and everything. And I see more and more conversation about handwriting the notes as opposed to typing them, and for many of the reasons that you have given, and the teachers have shared articles on corroborating what you have described today. So we're trying to kind of bring that back in, that the idea of working on the handwriting, the cursive writing especially. It's it's faster. You have to synthesize the ideas that you're hearing and on the page, and think so many good reasons why to write in cursive. Do you have any tips for older students or parents of older students, trying to get them kind of hooked back into writing as opposed to typing?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's several ways in to sort of restoke some kind of passion about handwriting. Obviously, there's like the really practical aspects of when you write something down, you're going to remember it better. And, that has been proven time and again through a lot of psychological research. But I think, there seems to be, at least what I'm seeing anyways, is ironically, in our digital age, there's this real sort of fascination with the analog world. And I think the more that you can draw and heighten people's experience to that, and let them engage with that, is a really interesting way. One way for older students who are might be like introducing them to fountain pens. And there's actually some really great, like, affordable fountain pens to get into. They even make Pilot makes a great disposable fountain pen that's only like a couple bucks. So it's not something that has to be super expensive, but just gives them a different writing experience. Because a lot of the pens that we use today, for instance, like, the most typical is a ballpoint pen. A ballpoint pen functions with this tiny roller ball inside of a tube, and it has this highly viscous ink. So you have to like put a lot of pressure down on the page in order to write. Well, that's also something that's going to contribute to writer's cramp, is if you have a very heavy hand. And so here we're using these tools that force us to have a heavy hand. So I would say, like, introducing a fountain pen is a great way, because you don't want to put pressure down while you're writing. And so that's a really great way. One of my dear friends, Brian Goulet, he's my same age, and he runs the largest online fountain pen store. And so much of his love has kind of blown up the world of fountain pens, and created this new passion amongst a lot of young people for the beauty of the writing instrument, and seeing the different kind of line variation you can get from a really good pen, and using different ink colors. It's a new way of being able to express yourself, and making the act of writing really fun and engaging.
We've made several trips as a family to the one-room schoolhouse, multiple one-room schoolhouses, and the penmanship is always among the lessons. It's pretty fun to see them try to attempt that and work on the letter forms that it takes them quite a while, and it's really quite the shift for them to make a lot of the time. Yeah. I meant to bring that up earlier. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great. I mean, that was part of the reason, going back, like, handwriting was something that was taught in individual schoolrooms, and there was this deep need for a solid, consistent form. And that's where Platt Rogers Spencer entered the scene to fulfill that need.
Okay. Well, there's the Colby bookstore has some Spencerian handwriting materials in there, that, interestingly enough, along with a couple other handwriting courses. So that's, folks want to check that out, we'll have a link to that.
I think I saw, I want to mention to the listeners to check out the links to Jacob's work. You're going to be blown away. I mean, I was amazed at some of the pieces that I saw on your website, and then also what I saw in the YouTube videos. And I believe I saw, maybe you could talk about this a little bit. I believe I saw you offer courses. Are these online courses, or can you tell us about those a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, right now I only offer like one online course, and it's on flourishing. So that is the course. If you're getting into calligraphy and you want to learn the beautiful art of flourishing, and just it is a great way to sort of play around with the pen, which can be sort of a foreign object to a lot of people when they first pick up a dip style pen. But that is available online, and yeah, it's a lot of fun, and it's really beautiful too.
And who's it geared towards, a course like that? If there were people listening, like a high school student, or what would you say, who would do well in that class?
I mean, I would say like, well, maybe middle school or high school would be old enough to grasp onto some of it. I mean, it's not going to be great for like real little kids. There has been, I've gotten some requests about doing some like an introduction into like cursive handwriting for young kids, and maybe one day I'll get around to doing that. There's a lot of different things that I do apart from being, a full-time artist and a dad to 3 kids and all of that. So hopefully one day I'll get around to doing that. There are some other great resources. Michael Sull is one of the other master penmen, and he's dedicated a huge portion of his life and career to just cursive handwriting. And he recently came out with another volume of a handwriting book that is really excellent. And so, and I know he has different books out there for different age ranges, and he's very big in the homeschool and classical school community. So he's already got phenomenal resources out there that talk a lot about the sort of like the inner workings of the different muscular modes of like finger movement, whole muscular movement, and whole arm movement in his books. And then he also he's like the greatest historian on American heritage handwriting. He always pairs the handwriting with this beautiful historical background.
This has all been really interesting. There's,
Yeah.
you know, I've studied a lot of manuscripts from, you know, 4th century through the Middle Ages, and I'm just blown away by the materials they used and the cost, especially of making pages, you know, on vellum, and then also papyrus before that, and the book form coming into existence, all of that. So I've noticed in studying certain scribes, there are 3 manuscripts in particular that I've worked on a lot, done several projects with them, and you get used to the scribe. It's almost like you know their personality or something by the end. You can detect the mistakes they're going to make and really appreciate. You can tell when I feel like I can tell when he was having a good day sometimes, and he just, you know, and the other times he's having a bad day.
Right.
There's
Yeah.
markings in the margins in their native language. These are Greek and Latin things, but they were mostly Irish scribes who were writing them. And I've always been almost jealous of what they can do. I mean, it's an art form that I really think is fantastic. And I have, in my own little way, I have a pushback against too much digital everything that we have. So that's why I was really excited to see your work, and it can't be described. We're talking here, and hopefully people are listening and they're curious enough to click the links and check it out, because we can't really describe what it is that you're doing here in any adequate way. I do have one more thing I was going to ask you, and you don't have to answer it, and you certainly don't have to name names, but I wondered if you have any rivals in your field. Is there anybody that's sort of your rival that you're trying to one up or something?
No. No rivals.
Yeah, I got to stick together.
I'm a pretty like non-competitive person by and large, and I'm also very friendly. So we have sort of these like, you know, John DeCollibus, for instance, we have sort of this like, you know, friendly banter back and forth. And you know, he said when I was first up and coming that he really wanted to break my arm because he was,
no.
you know, just here was this young kid coming in, and I still regard him, don't tell him this, but I still regard him as the top dog of like, he is the greatest ornamental penman alive. And we have like, you know, he's become like such a dear friend, a father figure in a lot of ways, because there's like scary similarities between the two of us. We're like, not only are we both master penmen and have this deep love for handwriting, but we're, you know, we both have a background in bodybuilding. So in our first like calligraphy conference together, we were talking about the golden age of penmanship and the golden age of bodybuilding, like simultaneously, and the key characters of both. So there's like kind of friendly banter back and forth, but no one that I'm trying to like to one up. There, I mean, those rivalries did exist back in the day. There were 2 master penmen that there was F.B. Courtney, who was regarded as the pen wizard, because he could do things with the pen that just seemed like magic. He could write upside down and backwards. He was ambidextrous, so he could change hands with the pen, or write with both hands at the same time. It was just he was just amazing. And then there was Louis Maderasz, and he was regarded as the king of penmen, because while he was more focused in one form, it was just said that no one could ever duplicate his style, no matter how hard they tried. And people were just sort of flabbergasted by the drama of his writing. And so there's a great story about these two penmen going at it one day, that an F.B. Courtney, sat down and wrote with the pen very quickly, this great word, slid it across the table to Maderasz, the king of Penmen, and said, "Accomplish that if you can." Well, Maderasz took like one look at it, and he turned the page over, dipped his pen, and wrote another word on the back of the page and slid it back to F.B. Courtney and said, "Accomplish that in a lifetime if you can." And so there was always these like unbelievable, like friendly rivals and great characters of history that you find in this otherwise unknown world of penmanship.
We've got a plan now here, right? And because first, like Jordan was saying, you need to follow the links and go to the website, because, and keeping in mind that these are analog drawings, these aren't just digital things. So Jake sitting down there with his tools to produce that, if that doesn't instill enough wonder and interest to actually try to get this, he's now given us the resources. So it's like, get your pen, get some of these books that are mentioned, and don't just marvel at it, but we should sit down and try some of it ourselves, I think, too. So yeah. It's a challenge for us.
Absolutely. Yep. And I think, I think of today, like, giving kids the same opportunity that I had growing up, because it was actually just handwriting, learning cursive in school, that was my foray into the world of calligraphy. And had I not had that, I don't know where I'd be, and I don't know what I'd be doing. It's like, it's become such a thing that has marked my life, and it's been an opportunity for me to express, my own personal creativity and make my own mark on the world. Hopefully for the good of others and the glory of God. But I think of today how it's like so many programs have taken handwriting completely out of school, and they've done away with cursive, and I think how sad, how many other kids are missed out on an opportunity just because it wasn't there for them to take hold of. And so that's why I'm I find myself often in the educational world advocating for this, because it is one of the deepest things of what makes us human, of our ability to articulate thought and to create, to imitate God as our creator, and create something ourselves. So yeah, I'm absolutely sending out that challenge to anyone who will accept it, to pick up the pen and write.
It's been great. It's been such a fun foray into this new world, and really have enjoyed getting to visit with you today and exploring the work that you have shared with us. Listeners, we will have a whole raft of links in our show notes, so check those out. You can find out more about Jake and the resources he recommended and so forth. So thanks again, Jake, for visiting with us, and we'll hope to visit with you again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It was a wonderful conversation.
Subscribe to the Colbycast on your favorite podcast app so that you don't miss an episode. And let us know how we're doing by leaving a rating or a review. And as always, feel free to email us at podcast@colby.org.
Mary, our Mother, pray for us. St. Maximilian Kolbe, St. Ignatius of Loyola, holy saints and angels, pray for us. Ad maiorem Dei gloriam.